Hey there, rubes and sluts. I'm ExoParadigmGamer, and I have been narrow-minded. I should probably explain what I mean by that. Let's start at the beginning.
It was a warm summer evening in 1998, and my family was on a long drive through the countryside of the Pacific Northwest. I was bored, and as a toddler often does, I made a lot of noise to make that clear. To ameliorate his agony, my dad lent me his atomic purple Game Boy Color, and I shut up for the rest of the trip. And that event, me friends, was the first time I ever played a video game. I was surprised another October morning when me dad brought home a Nintendo 64 from the local Target. I played a shitload of Super Mario 64. Then the Game Boy Advance came out, and me family searched frantically for a pair for me brother and me, until me mom happened to find them in an FAO Schwartz. Then the GameCube came out, and me dad tracked one down at our local Costco. Then the DS came out, and
I think you get the point. And that point is, my family and I grew up Nintendo. And even though my dad promptly ditched that tradition the moment the lackluster original Xbox came out, I never really had an interest in playing anything on it or the PlayStation line. I was quite biased for a long time, and I still have a deep soft spot for Nintendo, which is why I'm one of the 3 people I know of who owns a Wii U. That all changed, however, in December of 2012, when I decided to invest a good $50 or $60 or so in a used Sony PlayStation 2. I can now safely say, as an adult, that I really wish I had one of these things when I was a kid. There's so many great games to be played on the system, and even though I still consider GameCube games like Metroid Prime 1 and 2 and The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess to be better than anything on its competition, I can certainly see why the PS2 is considered one of the greatest video game consoles of all time. Because of my Nintendo background, most of the games and franchises I want to look at are naturally for Nintendo consoles. But today, I'm going to change all of that and look at some PlayStation games. And what better place to start than with my favorite Sony franchise of them all, Ratchet and Clank. Ratchet and Clank is the brainchild of California-based Insomniac Games, a developer best known before RNC as the creators of the popular Spyro the Dragon trilogy on PlayStation 1. After finishing Spyro 3: Year of the Dragon, the company decided to end their adventures with Spyro and focus on a secret project called Insomniac Game No. 5. This game never came to fruition, so the team threw the idea out and went back to the drawing board. The concept of Ratchet and Clank then came up after the team experimented with an idea of exploring planets and collecting weapons. The game was released in November of 2002 and it was received well and sold about 3.3 million copies, becoming one of the PlayStation 2's most popular franchises. It's also worth mentioning before I get this review on the road that Ratchet and Clank is actually the first game I ever played on a PlayStation console. It's only too fitting that it's the first PlayStation game I ever review. Oh, by the way, the reason why my footage isn't 4x3 is because the Hop-Hog is a piece of shit and I really should buy a new capture card. But I think I can salvage this with a little editing expertise. So we'll slide this in like that, and then pop this on over here, and there we go. Let's begin with the plot. We begin on planet Veldin, where we see a Lombax named Ratchet fixing up a spaceship of some kind. We then cut rather awkwardly to planet Quartu, where we see an assembly line speaking out sentry bots. One of these robots is a much smaller one named XJ0461, who upon activation sees a video on an infobot and attempts to escape. While driving the ship, the mini-sentry bot crash lands on Veldin. Ratchet sees the crash and retrieves XJ0461 from the rubble. While Ratchet continues to fix up his ship, the robot reactivates and reveals to Ratchet that the infobot holds a message of galactic importance. I think I'll let the game do the talking here.
Hello, citizens of... My race, the Blog, have a small problem. Our planet has become so polluted, overpopulated, and poisonous that we are no longer able to dwell here. But I, Chairman Drek, have a solution. We are constructing a pristine new world using the choicest planetary components available. So, what does this mean to you might ask? Using highly sophisticated technology, which you couldn't possibly understand, we will be extracting a large portion of your planet and adding it to our new one. Unfortunately, this change in mass will cause your planet to spin out of control and drift into the sun, where it will explode into a flaming ball of gas. But, of course, sacrifices must be made. Thank you for your cooperation.
Cut!
And if you don't like it, you can take your whiny, sniveling, snot-nosed populations, form a line behind me, and kiss my... We're still on? Well, turn it off, you idiot!
XJ0461 believes that the only way to stop Chairman Drek is to enlist the help of Captain Quark, a widely known superhero in their galaxy revered for stopping galactic evildoers. The robot, knowing that Ratchet's ship won't start without a robotic ignition system, offers to start the ship if he'll volunteer to help him find Quark. Ratchet agrees and decides to nickname XJ0461 Clank after the robot slams into the side of their ship during flight. Drek sees the pair leaving Veldin and dedicates his forces to eliminating the pair, including this shadowy guy, whose identity should be really obvious if you've ever played an RNC game before. So that's the basic premise, more or less. The story has a rocky start, but once it gets going, it gets a lot more interesting. The story itself more or less takes a backseat to the gameplay, which is more or less how I prefer my games. If the story is really the only appealing part of your game, then I might as well just be watching a movie. The game takes place in the Sardonic galaxy, in which you can visit about 15 or so planets and space stations. As Ratchet and Clank, your job is to explore these planets for gadgets, weapons, and other objects as you try to hunt down Captain Quark and stop Chairman Drek from ravaging the galaxy. Each planet has 2 or 3 missions to achieve, depending on which one, and at the end you're rewarded with gadgets or coordinates for other planets, which you can get from infobots. Most missions just require you to explore certain sections of the levels, defeating enemies and solving puzzles along the way. Control-wise, it's mostly functional. I don't know if it's just that I haven't played these games in a while or if it's just this first installment, but Ratchet seems a bit slippery. You'll get used to it, but for the first couple of planets or so, it might feel a bit awkward. Ratchet can use his gigantic Omni Wrench to bash enemies and can also throw it to attack enemies from a distance. Though you'll spend most of the game playing as Ratchet, there are a few occasions where Clank will have to explore chunks of the level in order for Ratchet to proceed. Clank's sections are more puzzle-driven, requiring you to manage these little gadget bots to defeat enemies and open doors. Personally, I don't think the Clank puzzles got especially interesting until the Future series on PS3, but it still throws some variety into the mix. There are also a few occasions where Clank will grow to gargantuan size, allowing you to bash at enemies that used to give you a hard time. It's kind of cathartic, actually. This only happens a couple of times, but it's still pretty fun. Scattered throughout the levels are crates, a la Crash Bandicoot, which contain refills for your weapons as well as the game's currency, bolts. Bolts are used for all sorts of things in this game, most notably for buying weapons and gadgets at the many Gadgetron vendors. There is an incredible variety of weapons in this game, all with their different uses and strengths. The Bomb Glove is useful for attacking multiple enemies at once, the Blaster is useful for unloading bullets into one enemy or taking out smaller enemies in one hit, and the Devastator can be used to blow up enemies who take a lot of abuse otherwise. Mixing and matching these different weapons to take on different enemies and attack patterns forms the crux of the game's combat, and it's pretty fun. It's actually a lot like a 3D Mega Man now that I think about it. Except, unlike Mega Man Legends,
Psst! Alonzo, practice playthrough.
You're given the ability to hold all of your weapons at the same time and select them at your leisure. Making this easier is the Quick Select, which you can activate by hitting the triangle button. You can customize this wheel to hold 8 weapons and gadgets at all times. What's kind of annoying about the Quick Select is, like the garbage shit inventory system from Star Fox Adventures, the game doesn't pause while you're cycling through it. Some might find that this adds exhilaration to the heat of battle, but I think it just allows enemies to take cheap shots at you while you're switching weapons. You can technically switch weapons by pausing the game and selecting them from the menu, but I think it would still have been nice to at least have the option for the Quick Select to pause the game. Not a huge deal, but something I felt I'd mention regardless. Difficulty-wise, I think the game is reasonably challenging but fun. It starts off easy but gets gradually harder as you progress. Ratchet can only take 4 hits before he kicks the bucket. You can buy upgrades to extend this to 5 and then 8 hits, but these upgrades cost so many bolts that as a practical matter, you're only going to have 4 hits for most of the game. Dying only sends you back to the nearest checkpoint, which are unmarked, which is admittedly pretty annoying. It couldn't have been that hard to program a checkmark bot or something, guys. Thankfully, it's only really that big of a deal in the longer and more linear levels, like Planet Umbris, where your only mission is to make it to the end of a giant planet-wide obstacle course. Even though there are 3 checkpoints or so, you'll never know where they are, and it's not worth dying to find out. Combat feels good overall, but it does feel a little awkward in comparison to other RNC games. The auto-targeting is mostly functional, but it requires you to point Ratchet at the enemies, which will obscure certain other enemies off camera, meaning that you can't see where they are, or more importantly, if they're attacking you. It's not so bad when you're going down hallways, but if you're in a big round area with enemies coming after you on all sides, it's a lot to keep track of. Starting with Ratchet and Clank 2 going commando, you're given the ability to strafe back and forth to dodge enemy fire and shoot straight, which totally fixes the problem I just mentioned, but it's nowhere to be found in this first game. Instead, the game encourages you to take out enemies from a distance, which you can do by entering first-person mode. The Visibomb launcher is a great tool for taking out tanks and ships as well as some of the beefier enemies, when you can get the damn thing to move the way you want it to. Damn it! Oh my god, where the hell am I? If you can learn to do this, the gunplay will feel considerably smoother, but in the occasions you're forced to take on enemies in close quarters, the awkwardness will still be there. Over the course of the game, you can purchase certain upgrades for Clank that allow Ratchet more mobility. The hover pack allows Ratchet to jump higher and farther and to glide over big gaps. The thruster pack is more or less the same thing, except it's faster and allows for a ground pound move. The hydro pack allows for faster swimming in water sections. Ratchet can also pick up doohickeys like the swing shot, which allows him to swing over gaps, and the grind boots, which allow him to take a page from Sonic the Hedgehog and grind on rails. While the game feels pretty linear for the most part, as you can usually do every mission on a planet the moment you unlock it, there are certain missions and items you can't grab until you come back with a specific item. In that sense, the game reminds me a lot of the Metroid series. There's that same sense of growing stronger, being able to gradually take on enemies and platforming challenges that you couldn't do before. Though you don't have to explore old planets all the way, you're well rewarded with tons of bullets and useful gadgets. And trust me, you're going to want to do that because collecting bolts in this game is absolutely essential. To buy most of the stuff in this game, you're going to need a hell of a lot. While you can purchase just about anything in the game you'll ever need as long as you're grabbing bolts from every crate and enemy you defeat, this more or less requires you to walk up to each individual bolt. You do eventually get a bolt grabber upgrade that alleviates this problem, but you don't get it until 3/4 of the way through the game, and by that point you've bought most of the items in the game anyway. In the sequels, bolts seem more plentiful and everything feels a lot cheaper, but in this first game, affording some of the more expensive weapons more or less requires you to farm bolts by playing litter levels over and over again. I hate it when games make me do shit like that. That's why I don't play JRPGs, folks. Bosses are pretty uninteresting for the most part. There's only about 4 or 5 in the whole game for one thing. They're pretty much regular enemies except they take more hits. You'll have to unload all of your weapons into them to defeat them, and they don't have any boss themes or anything. They're not terrible by any means, but they certainly could have been better. Speaking of which, I should probably talk about the aesthetics. Graphically, the game's decent looking for an early PS2 release, but not everything looks great. I found more than one instance of graphical pop-up in this one, and that's something they definitely should have fixed before releasing the game. Some of the textures also look muddy and low-res, especially the crates. Art direction wise, which I think is more important anyway, they did a hell of a good job. Each planet looks and feels unique, with exotic alien landscapes and plant life adorning the scenery. The character animations are also fantastic, absolutely perfect. The lip sync is especially delicious.
Hey, press conference is over. Captain Quark don't want no more reporters bugging him in his trailer.
Oh, you see, my friend and I need to speak to the captain about a matter of galactic security.
You mean you and your walking camera? You paparazzi make me sick. Now beat it!
But sir, I'm sure the Captain Quark will understand once we...
Now, save it. I know how it works. You convince me to let you in, you snap a picture of the captain in his underpants, then you sell a picture to the info tabloid for $1 million bolts!
You've got it all wrong!
Meanwhile, I'm stuck here making 6 bolts an hour, and I have to listen to a lecture from that cheapskate Quark. So you don't get in unless I get a kickback. In advance.
See, Kingdom Hearts? That's how you lip sync. The soundtrack was composed by French artiste David Bergot, better known for his work on television and film, as well as the RNC series. The music, while not the catchiest in the world, has a great sense of style and atmosphere and uses some very unique instrumentation. It kind of reminds me of how unique Stuart Copeland's work was in the Spyro games. I think the music gets a lot better in the sequels, but there are still a handful of standout tracks in this game, like Gemlik Moonbase, Planet Quartu, and Planet Gaspar. But the planet-hopping storyline, crazy and inventive weapons and gadgets, and the hybrid of Mega Man and Metroid gameplay alone do not account for why Ratchet and Clank remains my favorite Sony franchise. You see, this series has something that Crash Bandicoot, Jak and Daxter, Spyro the Dragon, and Uncharted have never had. A universe. To be more specific, it has a better sense of universe than the other franchises in question. You might have noticed by that cutscene I showed you earlier that this game has a very unique writing style and sense of humor. The closest comparisons I can make are Futurama and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, a television series and book series respectively that similarly feature sardonic humor, planet hopping, and a cast of kooky alien characters. In addition to all of the creative and unique worlds there are to explore, the way the developers and story writers bring these worlds and the game that encompasses them to life is absolutely ingenious. feels like a living and breathing world, a place you could actually visit, a place with a culture and a society that's similar to and reflects our own, but is different enough that you're interested in learning more about it. It's this sense of universe I find that makes me want to keep playing more RNC games so I can come back and see more of this universe that I hadn't before. You might remember that to get the coordinates for new planets you have to find infobots. Each infobot features a different cutscene, usually a commercial of some kind that features some kind of comical jab at commercialism and corporate malfeasance, which is similar to Futurama in more ways than one. Let me show a couple of my favorites just to illustrate what I mean.
New! From Gadgetron, the makers of weapons and other fine products, comes the Hollow Guys. With the Hollow Guys, you can fool robots into thinking you're one of them. Match your wits against other robots. Work on robotic assembly lines. Attend robot parties. The Hollow Guys. Available only at Gadgetron headquarters for a limited time. Not to be used for illegal purposes. We're only in sanctioned areas. You will not actually become a robot.
And how about this one?
Cities are full of smog, swamps are full of muck, and tar pits are full of tar. But here at Joe I Resort, the sun shines 24 hours a day. Visitors get a free O2 mask to explore our warm waters. The benign marine life will welcome you to the big blue world under the sea. You can also use our complimentary flippers to partake in speed swimming. So come to Joe I Resort and leave your world and your troubles behind.
But these commercials are only the tip of the iceberg. Each world features a cast of quirky characters to meet and interact with. Even though I haven't played this game in about 2 or 3 years, I still remember meeting side characters like the Plumber, Big Al, the Commando, Skid McMarks, the Miner, Elga von Streissenbergen, etc. Each has a unique personality that allows them to stick out in your mind.
Oh, heck, these dang rocks are too tough. Keep breaking my drill. Well, shoot my dog and call me Sally. Thanks, partner.
It's that sort of game that you pop in years after your first playthrough where you're constantly going, oh, I remember that guy. The other main characters are also pretty entertaining. Chairman Drek, voiced by none other than Kevin Michael Richardson, as our main villain is a hell of a lot of fun to watch. His dialogue is exceptionally well written, and it's entertaining to see him belittle all of his cronies.
Commander, we are finished with this world. Commence towing our planet to its next destination. Lieutenant!
Yes, sir.
You have fulfilled your tree quota. Barely.
We are ready to return to base.
Not so fast, Lieutenant. Just because we don't need any more trees doesn't mean they should have them. Destroy everything.
But my favorite character of all is none other than Captain Copernicus Leslie Quark, voiced by none other than Jim Ward. At first, the character is made out to be a strong, intelligent, and selfless hero. But you quickly realize that though he was a hero at one point, he's now little more than a character designed to sell products and push merchandise. Behind the theatrics, Quark is truthfully little more than a selfish coward who will do anything for money. Watching this guy strut around and self-aggrandize himself is just hysterical. It gets a lot more interesting in the later games, but he's still a lot of fun in this one. Ironically, our main characters are probably the least interesting of the bunch. As you can kind of tell from my short summary of the plot, we don't really get to learn much about Ratchet or Clank in this game. Their backstories, their personalities, etc. Their backstories wouldn't really get elaborated on until Tools of Destruction and Crack in Time on PS3. Clank is probably the better of the two. Despite having only just been created, Clank becomes immediately dedicated to stopping Drek and saving the galaxy, displaying a great sense of justice and responsibility. Despite this, he's shown to possess a sense of humor and a value for life. Ratchet in this game feels very out of place compared to the rest of the series. He's voiced by a different voice actor, Mikey Kelly, for one thing. The performance sounds to me at times like Kelly's trying too hard to be cool, ironically making Ratchet come off as lame. Characterization-wise, he doesn't really seem to have any goals or dreams, and though this changes partway through the game when he learns the truth about Quark, he spends most of the game arguing with Clank and ignoring the evil acts that Drek is committing. Ratchet certainly gets a lot more interesting and likable later down the line, but in this game I can easily say that he's my least favorite character. Now, before I get into the ending, I want to quickly talk about something. Thus far, I've been very unapologetic about showing the endings and final bosses of games I've reviewed, and I do this because I don't want to leave any stone unturned. I want to offer my complete thoughts about the game, but at the same time, I understand that this might ruin the game for people who want to pick it up and play it for themselves. So that's why I've resolved to take some steps to make these reviews more spoiler friendly. Whenever you see this,
spoiler alert!
that means I'm going to be talking about plot important details, the final boss, or the ending. When this happens, I'll give you 5 seconds to skip to a specific timestamp in the video where I give my final thoughts. That being said,
spoiler alert!
So, if you're still here, that means that you've either played the game already and know what the ending is, or you're a curious little wanker who has ignored my warning and decided to watch the ending anyway. Regardless, let's wrap this up. Ratchet and Clank eventually track down Captain Quark and Planet Rilgar, who agrees to help them if the two can clear his obstacle course in Planet Umbris. Upon finishing the course, Quark betrays them and reveals that Drek has commissioned Quark to be the spokesperson of Drek's planet, and that Quark has been dispatched to kill them. Quark unleashes a blogging and snaggle beast on the duo, which is defeated. Ratchet, feeling betrayed, resolves to get revenge on Quark for his betrayal. For this second third of the game, Ratchet is very hostile and confrontational towards Clank. Having seen the events of the games to come, it feels really disconcerting to see Ratchet threaten to sell Clank for scrap. The pair track Quark down to the Gemlik moonbase and defeat him in a space battle, sending him hurtling toward planet Ultinus. Though Quark is able to survive the crash, his inability to do away with Ratchet and Clank leads Drek to call off the endorsement deal, financially ruining Quark. After seeing Drek order the extermination of an entire civilization for his new planet, Ratchet realizes that Drek is kind of an asshole. Took you long enough. As Drek's planet nears completion, the chairman reveals that he intends to blow up Ratchet's home planet, Veldin, using a laser called the Deplanetizer, as Veldin happens to occupy the galaxy's perfect orbit. Ratchet and Clank track him down on Veldin, fighting off the chairman's elite guards. When Drek appears in a giant mech, he reveals that he intentionally polluted the Blarg's old planet so he could be paid boatloads of cash to build a new one, and that he plans to repeat the process on the new planet as well. After a somewhat tedious final boss battle, Ratchet and Clank defeat Drek, sending him flying toward his planet. They then flip the Deplanetizer over and use it to vaporize Drek and the new planet with him. The blast sends the pair flying, leaving the two clinging to the Deplanetizer for dear life. Clank is able to save Ratchet using the thruster pack, but his arm is damaged in the process. In a somewhat awkward and rushed ending, Ratchet offers to fix Clank's arm and the two head back to his garage. Cut, print, kill the pig. Overall, the story of this game is a lot of fun, though Ratchet's character arc is kinda shit. Drek makes for a great villain, and Clank, Quark, and the side characters were a lot of fun to interact with. The sense of universe this first game sets up would be built on considerably in the coming installments. Another thing to mention before I wrap up is that each world in the game contains 2 to 4 gold bolts hidden throughout the levels. Consider them this game's equivalent of star coins and red rings. And as you all know, I'm always down to collect this sort of shit. Some of them you'll probably find if you poke around the levels long enough, but some of them, I can't see how you'd know about unless if you're reading a guide, or just so bored that you'll try anything to find them. Collecting gold bolts allows you to purchase gold weapons in various hidden locations. So for this playthrough, I decided to track them all down with the intention of using them against the final boss. That's when I found out you can't even buy the goddamn things without a shit ton of regular bolts, and that you can't even access some of these weapons until after you've beaten the game, which kind of defeats the purpose of getting the weapons in the first place. It's like how Yoshi gives you a shit ton of lives in Super Mario 64 after you get the 120th star, telling you to keep playing. At that point, you've already done everything in the game anyway, so what's the goddamn point? Now, to be fair, you are given a sort of New Game Plus option after you beat the final boss, allowing you to keep all of your upgrades and weapons, so the gold weapons would probably be useful there. But that doesn't change the fact that you'll have to grind a metric but fuck ton of bolts to use them in the first place. I think finding the gold bolts should have been more than enough to access the gold weapons. And that, my friends, was Ratchet and Clank. And overall, it's actually better than I remember it. I expected, coming back to this game after the sequels, that I'd find it to be a somewhat mediocre entry in the series, but to my surprise, I still really enjoyed this one. The weapons are fun to use, the level design is really well done, the characters are quite entertaining, the art direction is great, and the music has a great sense of style. The combination of gameplay elements from Metroid and Mega Man allow for a unique gaming experience that I honestly haven't seen before or since. While it's certainly not the best RNC game ever made, I can certainly say it holds up better than most first installments in most long-running game series. But is this game necessarily the best place to jump in? I wouldn't necessarily say so. It's missing a lot of the RPG elements from the sequels, the controls need some fine-tuning, and the characterization for Ratchet and Clank isn't quite right yet. Most of the time you play the first game to learn more about the basics of the series universe and important plot elements. While this game delivers on the former, it doesn't really explain the latter. Unless if you're a stickler for playing series in orders, I think you could safely skip the 2 going commando and get into RNC just fine. Regardless, this first installment is a great game on the PlayStation 2, and I don't think you could go wrong if you were to pick it up and play it. That's the first game anyway. For this marathon, I'm only going to be looking at the installments in the original PlayStation 2 trilogy. I would like to talk about the future series on PS3 at some point, but not now. Trust me, it gets just as boring for me as it does for you when I have to review 6 or 7 games from the same series all in a row. So, meet me next time when we take a look at Going Commando, also on the PlayStation 2. Until next time, I'm ExoParadigmGamer, and I hope you enjoyed the review.